Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part for the 18th of July 2024. I've had such a lot of IT issues. I think OBS, the platform I use, updated and it screws up driver settings and nothing was working and my stuff wasn't syncing anyway. Another issue to do with my sticky note syncing, which is where I get all my links from, and oh my goodness, I'm 2 hours behind. I'm so sorry. Let's get on with it. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. 1,130 personnel lost is high, but where it's been for the last sort of month or so. So it's sort of in the middle of what we've come to expect, which is insane that we've come to expect over 1,000 personnel losses a day. 7 tanks is pretty much average and where we've seen it for the last 3 or 4 days. 12 armored personnel vehicles is also somewhat lower, as below average and lower than we have seen. It's been a little bit up and down, but I think what we are seeing is a move from tanks and armored personnel vehicles over to vehicles and fuel tanks. So we see 92 vehicles and fuel tanks lost. Now, is that the highest? No, it's not the highest, but it's one of the highest. If we look at Dell's stats that are so amazingly updated on a daily basis, we can see that, in fact, if I make it a little bit smaller so you can see what's going on here, hopefully you can see that above my ugly mug. You see this steep line getting steeper and steeper that indicates the blue line, the total number of losses, and the steeper the gradient, the worse it is. And of course that reflects this massive orange around here. You've got a trend line that is going up, not quite exponentially, but it is starting to get steeper and steeper, and that is a real issue for the Russians. They are losing a lot of vehicles and fuel tanks. Well, those vehicles, I would surmise, are motorbikes and golf buggies and the sorts of kit that you would not expect to see if you were operating an army that was in the right place in terms of equipment. Now, if we look at today's stats and look at the average, and also the we want the average and the record daily high. So we're going to look at these two columns and this one. So today's vehicles and fuel tanks, 92, which is a dark red. So that's Dell telling us that it's a bad day at the office. In that category, we've got bad day for personnel, bad day for artillery, fairly bad for drones, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Vehicles and fuel tanks is the one we're looking at. 92, the average is 23.73. That's a mean average. And then 101 is the highest that we have seen. But 92 is going to be up there with one of the highest numbers of losses, one of the highest losses in that category. Okay, 7 pieces of special equipment and 54 artillery systems being lost at really significant numbers on a daily basis. The Russians have an issue because they have very, very few. I was reading something about this yesterday. I can't remember. Is it that they have 2 facilities only that can make barrels, and I don't think they're doing a particularly good job at that. So the best option for Russia is to bring in barrels from a long time ago, D10s, 20s and 30s, M46s that are sort of 70 years old plus, and use them. They are losing a lot of equipment, and they are not manufacturing new howitzers and self-propelled guns as far as I can work out. And indeed, one of their factories that I think is the only place that does pretty much make self-propelled guns, I think, that was on fire last night, and we'll come to that later. So it's not looking good for Russian equipment, I think. And then when you go to look at Andrew Perpetua's loss stats for, this is yesterday's bunch of loss stats, because that came in just after I did my video yesterday. And he says, here are the losses I could identify yesterday. There was a motorcycle cemetery. So one of the videos he looked at obviously indicates that a lot of motorcycles were used and a lot were lost as well. Now, just in total numbers of pieces of equipment, you're talking about a 4 to 1 ratio, possibly a little bit more, maybe even 5 to 1, 4.5 to 1, something like that, maybe. I'm guessing there. When you look at the Ukrainian losses, some electronic warfare, engineering vehicle, recovery vehicle, pretty much usual stuff across those categories. Not many. There's 1 IFV, no tanks, 1 APC, 1 MRAP, and 3 bits of artillery. So that's 6 bits of combat equipment, and yes, a number of civilian pieces of kit there. when you look at the Russian kit, first of all, what's important to note is that there's a huge number of combat losses. So if you're talking 6 there, we're talking well over, I mean, this is a 4, maybe 5-to-1 loss ratio of Russian combat assets to Ukrainian combat assets. And then apart from artillery, when you look down the tanks, the IFVs and the MRAPs and APCs there, most of them are abandoned or destroyed. So the proportion of the vehicles that are being hit are being destroyed or lost irretrievably for the Russians, and that is serious. So there's a couple of things in the Ukrainians' favour then. Then when we look at the value, the Ukrainians didn't lose anything of significant value, some electronic warfare equipment, a little bit, but air defence system here, battery. This is the one that we saw yesterday, the nocturnal imagery of the 3 elements in the field. Now, I find it interesting that they only, and I almost said this yesterday, there appeared to be only a radar, a command vehicle, and 1 TEL, transporter erector launcher. What's going on there if you only have 1 TEL? Is that because you don't have the other elements to hand? I mean, or were they just out of shot in another field? I don't know. There was a fire somewhere else, but I think that might have been the field on fire as opposed to something burning to the left. And you just really had these 3 units just sitting there it took quite a few ATACMs to hit them for sure. But yeah, so Andrew Perpetua has these as all destroyed, a TEL command vehicle and a radar for the S-300. So that's really high value, not in terms of, well, it is high value to replace it monetarily, but actually it's the functional value. And if they don't have the TELs assigned to a battery like this, only 1 TEL, then it means that they might be short of TELs, and that's the one element of these air defense batteries that they have more of, it appears, from stocks and what we know. It's the radars and the command vehicles that you lose them, you're not going to replace them easily. Whereas you lose a TEL, there are many more erector launchers, transporter erector launchers than radars. Then we have a Brad 21 BM21 Grad. Multiple launch rocket system getting destroyed here. And most of the rest of the artillery is damaged, and that's because a lot of this will be towed artillery. Very difficult to fully destroy towed artillery with something like an FPV strike. FPV strike on a Grad might well explode the rockets on board, and then boom, that thing goes up like a house on fire, more than that actually. And you can really, I think, self-propelled howitzers and rocket launch systems and self-propelled mortars are more likely to go up in a big inferno than a towed howitzer that often has its ammunition kept separately, and there are very few moving parts. There's no fuel on board. It's just a hunk of metal, a contraption, if you like. And so if you're hitting the legs to that, the tail to it, then you're not going to do it a lot of damage. So you're more likely to see those bits of kit damaged as opposed to destroyed. We have a number of tanks here, T-62s, T-80s, T-72s, most of them destroyed and abandoned. A number of infantry fighting vehicles, BMP 1, 2s, 3s and BTRs, most of them abandoned and destroyed. A number of APCs of all the variants there, most of them abandoned and destroyed. And then 1 MRAP and some trucks. A lot of motorcycles here. That's the graveyard he's talking about. And then a load of Bukanka, Scooby-Doo vans, pickups, larders, golf buggies, most of those destroyed there. So a really bad day for the Russians, lots of equipment taken out. And remember, this is from a day ago, referring to footage that would have been picked up on previous days. And if you remember, I said, oh, that's a bad day for the Russians. I guess we're going to see some of that in a couple of days' time. And then lo and behold, here we see a number of these possibly coming through. So there's usually a lag between what the general staff say and what you see on the footage. So I'm guessing that in a couple of days' time, we'll see a massive number of vehicles and fuel tanks getting taken out, unless a lot of that footage from these sources came out it was done yesterday and came out yesterday. That's more unlikely. So there will be, I'm sure, a couple of days lead between this being claimed and the evidence filtering through. We have what do we have other sources talking about losses? First one is actually concerning Ukrainian losses, and some of the reactions to this have been quite negative because I don't think people understand what Krinky was. To the point where you get some of these, what a waste of brave men, what was the point of this except politics? And you don't know whether these are trolls, but I'd say they probably don't understand what was going on in Krinky on Dnipro River. They couldn't exploit it as it's marsh and you can't operate vehicles, and now they're out of men. I think is to misunderstand what happened at Krinky. So Euromaidan Press, as many are reporting, nearly 800 Ukrainian Marines were missing in Krinky on the Russian-occupied Dnipro bank. The Krinky bridgehead was established during Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive, and there were, as according to this, 262 fallen Ukrainian troops who were evacuated and buried. So that is to say about 1,000 plus men lost there in Krinky, which is horrible, right? Is they can ill afford to lose those men. But what happened at Krinky is they tried to make a bridgehead, get across there with vehicles, but then they couldn't really make pontoon bridges. They were getting hit. There was no way of getting vehicles across. But then they stayed there and they continued holding the bridgehead at Krinky. If you remember the map looking like something like that, right? So that is the Krinky area. Now, what then happened is they stayed there. So why would they stay there if there was very little chance of them being able to support those troops and increase the bridgehead? And it's because, as I said, day after day, the Russians were losing phenomenal amounts of equipment and troops precisely because those Ukrainian troops were there attracting the Russians in. And the Russians repeated the same thing over and over and expected a different result, and they didn't get one. And all they got was a massive attrition of their equipment and personnel. We had huge numbers of videos coming out from Russian troops saying the conditions are horrible, you know, we don't have food and drink, we don't have this, we're being attacked consistently by drones. Magyar's birds were operating there incredibly effectively. You had about 4 units, and eventually the Ukrainians pulled out from Krinky, and they pulled out mainly because of Kharkiv offensive from the Russians that drew 3 Ukrainian units from there up to Kharkiv, including Magyar's birds, interestingly. But just prior to that anyway, the Russians had started to adapt and were not bringing in as much equipment and personnel as close to Krinky as there had been. It had been, yes, that's bad. You know, 1,000 people plus for the Ukrainians lost is bad, but the Russians lost a phenomenal number of pieces of kit that's been visually confirmed. The ratio is there. It's massively in favour of the Ukrainians, and you would assume that was the same for the troops as well. Now, those troops who were sent across the river by the Ukrainians would have been wondering what the point of them doing that was, because they're like, well, we're not expanding the bridgehead here, so why are we here? Well, actually, sounds pretty harsh, but arguably they were used sacrificially. And that sounds terrible, but this is the reality of war, is that you do these things in order to bring about a greater gain, right? Militarily speaking, which is itself a greater good. So you have, you know, smaller evil for a greater good is the moral consequentialism of that. That is in philosophy, moral consequentialism. And that's kind of what's applied in some of these military maneuvers. This, if you look at the raw numbers and you take away from the human element of this, the raw numbers are very much in favor of the Ukrainians still. And so I think that's how it should be interpreted, and not so much as those people you know, who might be reacting to this in terms of just seeing those numbers and saying how terrible it was. And unfortunately, not as many people have been looking at these things day to day as we have, and showing the sheer volume of equipment that the Russians lost in trying to take back that bridgehead. Okay, Putin's desperate for peace talks, says Tim White, because he's running out of equipment. This is so true. This happens every time Putin. So Lavrov, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, has been talking about negotiations again. So the Russians are ready to negotiate, and you're only saying that because it's in your best interest, and that's because you're getting hammered in other places. And so actually, if you can negotiate now, then you get to keep what you've got. Because you ain't going to get all that much more because you are running out of stuff. Well, new analysis says almost all of Russia's old usable stock is gone. Production can't keep up with losses, and even the new tanks are using old parts. And this is a story in The Economist. Now, we've seen various analyses from Perun, from Jompi, from HIMARS, and from Covert Cabal and other sources online to show that they are massively running out of kit. Although there are still elements of large numbers of pieces of kit in certain categories. But the question is, even if they do have large numbers, what state is that in as they cycle through all the kit that they can more easily refurbish and repair? You are getting to a point where you have the dregs of what you got left, and to repair and get them to the front line is super challenging, to the point where we are starting to see, we saw a train of T-54s yesterday, and today here, or this is actually the 16th, constant T-62 shipments. Looks like the 103rd managed to increase its pace of work, says Jumpy about a particular stockpile, a base. Another batch of 12 plus T-62M OBR 2022, so these ones that just updated, T-62s that are brought out, so it was given a buff of a bit of a buff up, and then I know you put a badge on it and say, right, that's 2022 version. From the 103rd BTR-Z en route to the front line, according to the car's plate number. The video was shot in the Republic of Bashkortostan. Again, this shows you that they are bringing out older tanks. They aren't producing T-90s. That's what they'd ideally be bringing to the front line in train loads of 20, 50, rather than a train load of 12 T-62s, a bunch of T-54s yesterday. Again, it shows you that things are difficult. So just to look into this Economist article a little bit, the key issue is not manpower, it says near the beginning. Oops, what have I done there? The key issue is not manpower. Russia seems able to go on finding another 25,000 or so soldiers each month to maintain numbers at the front of around 470,000, although it is paying more for them. Production of missiles to strike Ukrainian infrastructure is also surging, but for all the talk about Russia having become a war economy with some 8% of its GDP devoted to military spending, it's able to replace its staggering losses of tanks, armoured infantry vehicles and artillery only by drawing out of storage and refurbishing stocks built up in the Soviet era. Huge though these stocks are, they are not infinite. I wouldn't say it only does that. It does build new stuff, but the question is that new stuff really very good? So even if they are bringing out some of the newer variants of their newer tanks, are they missing like elements of their fire control system? Are they missing, some of the really great electronic components that they need, such as you get on the Leopard 2s that are coming to Ukraine? And so I think even if they are building new tanks, they're going to be the poor cousins of what they could be. But they're mainly kind of refurbishing older tanks. Okay, according to most intelligence estimates, after the first 2 years of the war, Russia had lost about 3,000 tanks and 5,000 other armoured vehicles. Oryx, a Dutch open source intelligence site, puts the number of Russian tank losses for which it has either photo or videographic evidence currently at 3,235, but suggests the actual number is significantly higher. Now, Oryx isn't working at the level I think it once was. Jakub Janowski is the main guy keeping that going. You've got War Spotting, which is with Richard Vareka and others, and then you've got Andrew Perpetua's data sets, which I think are really good on a daily basis to show you the sheer numbers of losses they're having. Alexander Goltz, an analyst from Stockholm Centre for East European Studies, says that Putin has the old Politburo to thank for the huge stockpiles of weapons that were built up during the Cold War. He says that Soviet leaders knew that Western military kit was much more advanced than their own, and they opted for mass, churning out thousands of armoured vehicles in peacetime in case of war. Before its demise, says Mr. Goltz, the Soviet Union had as many armoured vehicles as the rest of the world put together. When the then Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu boasted in December 2023 that 1,530 tanks had been delivered in the course of the year, he omitted to say that nearly 85% of them, according to an assessment by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, a London think tank, were not new tanks but old ones, mainly T-72s, also T-62s and some T-55s dating back from just after the Second World War that had been taken out of storage and given a wash and a brush up. In other words, 15% of those tanks were new, and as mentioned, of those that are new, really how good were they? Did they have the latest fire control system components, so on and so forth? Since the invasion, about 175 reasonably modern T-90M tanks have been sent to the front line. The IISS estimates the annual production this year could be approaching 90. However, Michael Gierstad, an analyst with the IISS, argues that most of the T-90Ms were actually upgrades of older T-90As. As those numbers dwindle, production of newly built T-90Ms this year might be no more than 28. Now, the losses for T-90, well, I don't know if it's M's or a combined T-90s, but it's over 100 now. Pavel Luzin, an expert on Russian military capacity at the Washington-based Center for European Policy Analysis, reckons that Russia can build only 30 brand new tanks a year. When the Ukrainians captured a supposedly new T-90M last year, they found its gun was produced in 1992. Mr. Luzin reckons that Russia's ability to build new tanks or infantry fighting vehicles, or even to refurbish old ones, is hampered by the difficulty of getting components. Stores of components for tank production that before the war were intended for use in 2025 have already been raided, while crucial equipment such as fuel heaters for diesel engines, high voltage electrical systems and infrared thermal imaging to identify targets were all previously imported from Europe, and their sale is now blocked by sanctions. The lack of high quality ball bearings is also a constraint. Chinese alternatives are sometimes available, but are said to not meet former quality standards. Furthermore, the old Soviet armament supply chain no longer exists. Ukraine, Georgia and East Germany were all important centres of weapons and components manufacture. Ironically, Kharkiv was the main producer of turrets for the T-72 tanks. The number of workers in the military-industrial complex has also fallen dramatically, says Mr. Luzin, from about 10 million to 2 million, without any offsetting step change in automation. Fascinating stuff here. And just to finish, another major concern is artillery barrel production. For now, with the help of North Korea, Russia appears to have enough shells, probably about 3 million this year, sufficient to outgun the Ukrainians until recently by at least 5-1, and sometimes by much more. But the downside of such high rates of fire has been the wear and tear on barrels. In some highly contested areas, the barrels of howitzers need replacing after only a few months. Yet, says Mr. Luzin, there are only 2 factories that have the sophisticated Austrian-made rotary forging machines. The last one was imported in 2017, needed to make the barrels. They can each produce only around 100 barrels a year compared to with the thousands needed. Russia has never made its own forging machines. They imported them from America in the 30s and looted them from Germany after the war. The solution has been to cannibalize the barrels from old towed artillery and fit them to self-propelled howitzers. Richard Vereka, an open source analyst, thinks that by the start of this year, around 4,800 barrels had been swapped out. How long the Russians can carry on doing this depends on the condition of the 7,000 or so that may be left. Mr. Gierstad says that with multi-launch rocket systems such as the TOS-1A, eking out barrel life has already meant much shorter bursts of fire. But the biggest emerging problem is with tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, which are still crucial to any offensive ground operations at scale. Although the IISS estimated that in February of this year, Russia may have had about 3,200 tanks in storage to draw on, Mr. Giersad says up to 70% of them have not moved an inch since the beginning of the war. A large proportion of T-72s have been stored uncovered since the early 1990s and are probably in very poor condition. Both Mr. Goltz and Mr. Luzin reckon that at current rates of attrition, Russian tank and infantry vehicle refurbishment from storage would have reached a critical point of exhaustion by the second half of next year. I personally think it's fairly critical now because you've seen a behaviour change in the Russians' activities. Golf buggies and motorcycles and garden sheds, track garden sheds, so on and so forth. Unless something changes before the end of the year, Russian forces may have to adjust their posture to one that is much more defensive, says Mr. Gierstad. It could even become apparent before the end of summer. Expect Mr. Putin's interest in agreeing a temporary ceasefire to increase. Well, funny you should say that, because Russia is ready for negotiations regarding Ukraine and European security issues, said Lavrov, emphasizing that talks should not compromise anyone's security. If Russia speaks, it lies. Do not trust a single word this madman says Noel reports. Well, I think this shows that things are possibly quite desperate for them. So, yeah, a really interesting article there in The Economist. Anyway, just to show that, yeah, it's not all good news for Ukraine. Obviously, they are losing these medium distance strikes from, able to be, these targets are able to be acquired by these Orlan and Zala reconnaissance drones. They're becoming, well, not becoming, this has been such an issue for a long time. So here we have a P-18 radar being destroyed by a Kh-35 missile fired from a Russian Su-34 bomber in Dnipropetrovsk. So the Russians still taking quite a toll on some of this equipment that's quite far behind the lines. Now, something's doing a lot of doing the rounds this morning Freedom of Russia Legion reported that they have burned several pieces of military equipment at Bolshoi's Savino airfield in the Perm region of Russia. There's been no official confirmation, and it's difficult to know what has been destroyed here, but something is burning. They have certainly done something, and that is good news. The Ukrainians are going to be absolutely loving that. Really important help there by some of their allies, if you like, Russian allies who are not happy with Russia and Putin. And I reported this fire, but it got even bigger yesterday. 2 warehouses filled with construction materials and adjacent administrative buildings were on fire in Krasnodar. Huge fire that. Again, Russia on fire. And we've got a number of these instances yesterday. It's becoming, it's been an issue. Again, this has been an issue for a long time, but it seems with the summer months maybe, and also just the ease with which you can cause so much issue with fire. I've been talking about this a lot recently, and just watch out Europe and watch out Ukraine, because I think the Russians are going to be trying to hit back with similar tactics. Not saying that all of these are sabotage though, but in Moscow right now, this was actually yesterday, the building of the Center for Digitization of Education is on fire. So a really big building on fire, an important building there on fire. And then what do we have here? On July the 17th at about 3 a.m, someone set fire to an electric locomotive at the Petelino railway station near Odintsovo in Moscow region, according to the Ministry of Emergency Situations. The fire was about 5 square meters. That is, the entire cabin of the electrical locomotive was burning, so on and so forth. The purpose of the action and the effects are not clear. Petelino is a small station. The only equipment is benches, lighting and platforms for crossing the rails. No security or video surveillance. The electric locomotive was not hooked up to any train and simply stood at the station. It may have been used as a shunting locomotive, etc., etc. Point is that, for me, these are just easy things that someone could do if they had sympathies for Ukraine. Assuming this is connected to the Ukraine war, it might just be some kids, some ne'er-do-wells causing an issue, but it would be very easy for Ukrainians to pay someone a couple $100 to go and do this, and with no CCTV, it's just a relatively low risk thing to do, but could cause issues for the Russians. Then there's a new concert and theatre complex due to open in December. It seems to be trying to denazify itself, says Tim White, hashtag Russia on fire. The roof is on fire at the venue in Sochi. And this is quite it's obviously very modern because it's still being built. It's said to be the only one in Europe that can transform the stage for different performances in just 30 minutes. On fire yesterday. And then we have, I haven't got it. There was another fire. Just going to go and find that now. Actually, it's this one, but I've got it in the next section because I didn't know whether there's a strike or not. I still don't know, actually. A major fire's broken out in the military plant Ural Transmash in Yekaterinburg in Russia. This is reported to be the only factory producing self-propelled artillery units. It does tram cars as well and other military equipment. It's on fire, and it's a fairly significant fire there. There's a lot of talk about that at the moment, and I didn't know whether that was a strike or just a bit of sabotage or a random Russian smoking incident. Okay, now, in terms of distance strikes, overnight Russia attacked Ukraine with a mix of missiles and drones. They managed to shoot down all 16 of the Shahed drones, both Kh-69 or 59 cruise missiles. They didn't shoot down the Kh-35 anti-ship missile. I don't know if that's that one that hit that P-18. It says overnight though, that P-18 radar. But anyway, might be some damage to something in Ukraine with regard to the Kh-35. Of course, all of these will do damage in some way to Ukraine, just probably not to the intended target. Now, in terms of what took place inside Russia, breaking Russian Telegram channels report a major naval drone attack on Novorossiysk. With this video, it looks like the video, probably it appears from the Russians, shows a drone getting blown up. So Crimea was also attacked, according to, attacked with those drones as well. So possibly several places being targeted with naval drones. Did they have any success? Novorossiysk is where most of the Russian Black Sea Fleet is now positioned, and not in Sevastopol, because Sevastopol is within range of drones and missiles, so on and so forth, and it's untenable for the Russian Navy to stay there. So they are at the worst option in terms of the size of the port, the depth of the port, at Novorossiysk, and the facilities it has there. Now, Ukrainian sea and air drones under SBU command conducted a successful attack on a Russian Coast Guard base located on Lake Dunuslav. During the overnight assault, key facilities such as a command post, ammunition depot, equipment storage, electrical substation, technical structures, and enemy firing positions were heavily damaged and rendered inoperative, says no report. So there's some damage, it appears, done to equipment and goodness knows what in Lake Donuslav, and I presume that is on Crimea as opposed to in Novorossiysk. So certainly some success for the Ukrainians last night. As well as that, a drone has hit something in the border region of Belgorod. Ukraine is being blamed for the strike on infrastructure in the center of Belgorod, and I think was there, fire in it's an electrical utility company, so again, electrical infrastructure being struck in Belgorod. Then here we have the Ural Transmash, one of the most important Russian military industrial complexes, is on fire, a fairly significant fire, and that could put paid to production there. Obviously, it's going to be a very large place, so that could just be one small area of it on fire. So who knows what the effect of that would be, but I think that's significant. And then we have also a hit previously, but some information is coming out from July the 15th. Attack was made on the military unit 65372 in Crimea. This is a separate special purpose radio node of the GRU. The hit was on one of the buildings that were created specifically for the needs of the Russian army and were actively used. So we have some satellite imagery that appears to show damage to those buildings. But I don't know too much else about that. We're going to go on to other bits and pieces. We've had Lavrov, as mentioned, calling for negotiations, which I think signifies that things aren't going particularly well for them, for the Russians. And if you want to know what negotiation, whether the Russians are really serious about negotiations in terms of what their general thoughts are towards Ukraine, when you've got appeasers like, and I don't want to get too political in this video, but you've got JD Vance, the new pick for vice president for Donald Trump, has just sung the praises of Lavrov, basically, and wanting to do peace. So it just makes me almost want to cry. JD Vance and his pro-Russian positioning is just one of the worst decisions for Ukraine you can think of. Anyway, as Anton Gerashchenko here says, listen carefully. This is the opinion not just of Russian actor Globitsyn, but also of Russia's leaders and Russians poisoned by propaganda. Quote, Ukraine should not exist. Ukrainians are Russians. But if they consider themselves Ukrainians, they are Nazis. As Putin and Medvedev have repeatedly said, for Russia, any Ukraine would be nationalist because of this. Because from his and Putin's point of view, the very existence of a sovereign Ukrainian state is nationalism. Any Ukrainian is a nationalist Nazi for them. Their goal is for Ukraine and Ukrainians to cease to exist. This should be clearly understood when talking about negotiations with Russia. Even Ukrainians from already occupied territories and with correct views will be persecuted. And just to give you an idea of what he says here, he says Ukraine shouldn't exist, but that doesn't mean we should destroy Ukrainians. It's a logical part of us. I have a fellow Englishman. He said, well, look, I can't tell the difference between a Russian and a Ukrainian. What's the difference between them? I said, well, there is no difference. Ukrainians are the same as Russians. They're just Nazis. There you go. So that's his position. And he laughs at that. Ha, ha, ha. Isn't that funny? And so we can just kill them. And this is just a widespread opinion amongst propagandists, amongst Russian population, with some amount of the population. And they are being fed these claims repeatedly on state television night after night after night. And yet here we are seeing some of our politicians saying, yeah, we should go and negotiate with them. Those people that want to exterminate you, absolutely exterminate you, and say these things in no uncertain terms, right? Yeah, I'm going to force you to go and, the people that are murdering your lot, yeah? Peter, people are consistently beating you up and say that they will just exterminate you. And even if you do peace, like Medvedev came out and said, well, we're still going to come back and exterminate you. Yeah, I want you to do peace with them. Yeah, that's what we want you to do. Sod off, fans. We got the Russian government, according to the UK intelligence update, say they are going to slow down WhatsApp. So they've begun to, I don't know if they said it, but they have begun to slow down traffic on the encrypted messaging app WhatsApp. Public explanation is to limit the ability of extremist groups to communicate. Under Russian government definitions, this likely also includes constraining the ability of opposition activists and those opposed to the war in Ukraine to organise and communicate. Separately, the Russian independent media reported that disruption to the YouTube online video platform was due to deliberate slowdowns in traffic by the Russian government. Presidential administration is reportedly likely to block YouTube altogether in September, so on and so forth. So they are really restricting their own population. They're restricting that flow of information. They're controlling the information spaces more and more. Now, just on the economy, Russian economy is finally showing signs that the central bank is running out of options. No one wants to buy OFZ bonds, and Russian citizens believe that inflation will outpace the forecast from Moscow. Russia needs to borrow 4 trillion rubles in 2024 through bond sales, says Malcontent News. Inflation expectations of the population for the next 12 months rose to 12.4% in July from 11.9% in June. And return to the level of January 2024, so on and so forth. I mean, things are looking bad, and people's perceptions of things are also looking bad. So there is that. Just what else to mention? Just a couple. So that's pretty much the news for today. I just want to mention a couple of things on YouTube deleting comments. So I've already told you that it's not me that's deleting them. Some of the mods might be active. Mods, just be careful, by the way. But it's essentially 99.999% going to be YouTube. YouTube is having, apparently there's some issues with Russian activity over the last couple of days as well. And you've just heard that they're trying to slow down YouTube or something from UK intelligence. Anyway, Finnish guy says, regarding deleting comments, it should also be mentioned that some people apparently don't know that if a comment gets too many downvotes, then it will be hidden. That is, the comment won't actually be deleted, but it won't be seen. YouTube is also known to issue shadow bans from time to time. That is, when you write too many wrong comments in YouTube's opinion, it may happen that during the next couple of days, your comments will not be visible to anyone but you. And since this ridiculous platform doesn't tell us what is behind deleting or hiding a comment at any time, the whole system is so confusing that we ourselves can never be sure what has been the cause of things. I can't understand how a company the size of Google can't implement moderation similar to that of others, in which the reason why something is moderated is even stated. Even the harmless comments, and sometimes they publish such offensive comments against other commenters that almost everyone on other social platforms, they would either not be published at all, or they might get banned for a month on Facebook, for example. Whatever it was, the entire comment section of YouTube and the moderation has been implemented so illogically and stupidly that it's hard to even comprehend it. One way to quickly check if your comment has been published is also to look at the comments in your own profile's history. It's actually sometimes even a better way than pressing the show new comments buttons. Remember, there's a filter between top comments and newest comments. Flip between those to see if your comment is there or not. Edit. Forgot to mention that some of the comments, especially criticising Russia or defending Ukraine, have disappeared, according to several people. Also, because apparently the rogue state has programmed a bunch of bots to report comments that are against the country's agenda. And because the system is already as confusing as it is, the author of the comment does not have the slightest chance of factually knowing what has ever been the reason for hiding or deleting. So yeah, if the Russians have bots that go around scraping comment threads on, particularly on Ukrainian channels or pro-Ukrainian channels, you might get bots just repeatedly downvoting comments until they're automatically shadow banned or shadow deleted, if you like. And it's just the nature of the beast. And I'm going to leave you with this one. So this is from I can't always tell whether it's that person. So JDO Grules. Or J Dog Rules. J Dog Rules, of course. So JDog Rule says, afternoon, Jonathan. Hope all is well. I'm sitting waiting for my recruiter to meet up with me at the MEPS facility. The Ukraine war and other factors has convinced me to join the military, whether it be a NATO response for the RUUA war, Russia-Ukrainian war, or China and Taiwan. I'd like to be part of a group that can respond if something happens and stand for what's right. Thank you for all the coverage and bringing reality to a wide audience. In September, when Basic comes around, I'm definitely going to miss your voice daily for the 13 weeks I'll be away. Just incredible. That is the ultimate decision, isn't it? To say, right, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, or my time where my mouth is, and go and support what I think is right. I don't know where your man is from here, but good luck to him, and joining up for the right reasons there. Good stuff. So I'm just trying to see where they're from the US. So from the US there. Brilliant stuff. Let us know how you get on. Anyway, thank you for watching, everybody. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and speak to you soon.